Hello there, and thanks for joining me. I'm digital artist Aaron Rutten, and in this video, I'm going to share 5 ways you can ruin your digital artwork. The first way to ruin your art is to over-apply effects. So I have a couple of images open here in Photoshop. The first is the heart on the left. Let's go to Filter, then we'll go to Filter Gallery, and let's try something like this paint daubs. Let's play around with the brush size and the sharpness. Let's click OK. And while this kind of pops out and it enhances the sharpness of it, it makes it look very fake and digital. It looks like a very dated 90s or early 2000s effect. And it doesn't look as natural as it does without the effect. So I would recommend not using those kind of painterly effects, even on photographs, because it just does not look like a painting. Now, most people aren't going to use extreme effects like that. Most people will use subtle changes like color and lighting changes. But you can also over-apply those. For example, I'm going to go to Image, Adjustments, and let's try a common adjustment like Levels. Now this little mountain shape is called a histogram, and the histogram shows you a visual representation of all your lights and darks in the image. So over here on the left is the dark, over here on the right is the light, and in the middle is the midtone. So what this is showing now is there's not a whole lot of absolute black, there's a lot of midtones, and then a little bit of white in this piece. I can bring these sliders in and I can increase the amount of white. And what this is going to do is this is going to change what's almost white to completely white. And so I'm changing light grays to white, lighter grays, and you can see the detail starts to disappear. If I bring the darks in, the detail starts to disappear on the other end. You can see it consuming the background. Now this is a very extreme example of a lighting change. Most people would not make a change like this. But if we go ahead and apply this, and then we do a before and after, you can see it's completely robbing the image of all of its fine detail in the midtones, the darks, and the highlights. So even if I do a less extreme change, maybe something like this and like this, I still have to worry. If you look around these little highlight areas on the brain here, some of those areas start to disappear and kind of blend together, and you start to really quickly lose those highlight areas. So a little bit of an adjustment might be okay. This could benefit from being brightened a little bit, especially if I were going to print it. That might be an okay adjustment. If we do it before and after, it adds a little bit of contrast, but you have to be very careful. Ideally, what you want to do is rather than apply an effect directly to that layer, you want to create an adjustment layer, or you want to duplicate your layer and apply the effect to that. The reason being is that then I can go in and I can add a little bit of adjustment here, but that adjustment's on a separate layer, so I can reduce the opacity of that. And 9 times out of 10, when you apply an effect, you're going to want to reduce it just a little bit because we have a habit of over-applying effects as artists. So I'm going to go ahead and reduce the opacity a bit and do it maybe midway between, and now it's a more subtle change without being too extreme. You also don't want to over-apply effects that are going to lose the original feel of the piece. For example, I can add a hue saturation, and I could really oversaturate this, and change the hue, and then go in and add a color balance and just add all kinds of wacky effects. But in the end, if it's just distracting from the piece, like this looks kind of cool, it's nice colors, but it removes that original monochromatic, kind of simple scientific feel that I had going before. I wanted it to look kind of surreal, and now it just looks way over processed. The second way to ruin your digital artwork is by accidentally overwriting your original. And that's even happened to me occasionally, so you really have to watch out for it. Now, I have my original painting here. Let's say this is a layered file, or maybe it's just a high-res version of your work. It's the master copy. It's the most detailed version. It's the final save. It's the one that you want to keep, the one that you want to print from, the important one, right? But what if you open that, and then let's say maybe you make a smaller copy. You go to Canvas Resize, and you make it 200 pixels tall, just to make it smaller. Maybe you want to post this on the web or make a thumbnail of it or something, and you accidentally click Save. Now, I just did that here. Now, if I go back and I look at my original, what was a very big detailed copy of my artwork is now permanently saved as a 200 pixel version. So if I close what I was working on and I reopen that original painting, all of a sudden it's much smaller, and all of that detail that I had before is gone. I can't get that back. Now, besides accidentally saving a smaller copy over your original, you can also have some problems that happen by overwriting your folders or accidentally reformatting your hard drive. And that actually happened to me recently. I was playing around with a new hard drive that I got. I moved some project files to that hard drive rather than copying them, forgot that they were on that new hard drive, and then ended up reformatting it. And what happened is I lost a whole bunch of my work in progress. So it happens to the best of us. You just have to watch out for it. So to prevent this from happening to you, always remember to save copies of your work. If you need a smaller copy, do a save as. Do not do save. I almost always choose save as. I don't do save because once you hit save, sometimes it's final and you can't go back. Be very careful not to overwrite any of your folders or any of your hard drives with the wrong files. And make sure to save copies of your work to a separate hard drive. Don't just save it to a different folder within that hard drive. Pick a different hard drive, or get a little USB stick like this and save your files to that, or an external hard drive, or back them up online, or have like 5 different backups, because then you have extra copies, and if something happens to 1 or 2 or 3 of those drives, then you'll always have a backup of your work. I mean, think about it. If you've been a digital artist for years and years and years, you've got hundreds of paintings, and those could just disappear like that, just poof. That's almost happened to me a few times. I've almost lost entire years of work from hard drives dying, so don't let it happen to you. And as far as how often to back up, you don't need to do it like once a week or once a month. I just back things up as needed. So if I just completed a project and it's a really important project, or I just recorded a bunch of video or just did a bunch of hours of painting, I'll just temporarily back that stuff up to something, again, like a little USB flash drive, and then I have all of my work in progress saved up until that point. The third way to ruin your digital artwork happens when you merge layers that use different blend modes or composite methods together. You get some unexpected results. For example, I have this image here, and I've created a bug, and that bug has a couple layers, and I have it placed on top of this photo here of a mushroom. Now, the shadow is a multiply blend mode or a multiply composite method, and so it blends with the background, it gets darker, and it looks natural. The bug is a normal or default layer, and if I were to add another layer, let's say a screen composite method layer, and maybe I'll take something like the glow brush, and maybe I'll make this a glowing bug or something like so. I have 3 completely different composite methods or blend modes. So now if I select all 3 of these and I merge them all together using Control E, what happens is that glow that was surrounding the bug now turns opaque, and now it's a big red patch rather than blending with the background as it did before. You can also see underneath where the shadow turned almost white. If I do an undo, you can see that's not how it's supposed to look when the layers are all separate. But when I merge them together, what's happening here is a single layer cannot be 3 different composite methods or blend modes. It can only be 1, and right now it's defaulting to the default or the normal composite method. I could change it to screen, and now that glowing area blends with the background, but then the bug disappears. Or I could change it to multiply, and now the shadow looks correct, but then everything else doesn't look right. Now it looks like a ghost ladybug. And if I go back to normal, again, it still doesn't look right. So there isn't any one of these composite methods that's going to work. So how do we deal with this problem? Well, for one, you want to leave layers that are different composite methods separate, so don't try to merge screen with multiply, it's just not going to work. Keep your layers separate for as long as possible, and then when you get to the end of your painting and you're pretty much done working on it and you don't need these layers to be separate, just go ahead and do a drop all or a merge all layers. So I can go to layers, drop all. That's going to fuse all the layers simultaneously, preserving all of their appearances into a single layer, and then it looks fine. All those layers are merged, and I don't get any unexpected results. Now, it's fine to merge 2 layers that share the same composite method or blend mode. For example, I could create another screen layer here. I could set this to blue, and I could add kind of a halo of blue surrounding that. Now I have the blue layer and the red layer that are glowing, and I can go ahead and merge those 2 together with Control E. It will change it to a default composite method once it's merged, but I can change it back to screen, and now those 2 layers are fused together, and it looks fine. The fourth way you can ruin your digital artwork isn't necessarily going to be your fault. It can happen because your file gets corrupted while it's saving, or maybe your computer crashes, and something happens and your computer didn't get a chance to completely write all the information for that file, or maybe some information got jumbled up. And this is a pretty rare circumstance, but it can happen. For example, I had a painting that I was working on for a long time, and in the middle of saving, something crashed. I think maybe my computer crashed or something happened, and it didn't save the file all the way. And then when I restarted my computer and opened it again, there was a big patch that looked something like this, where it was a bunch of just blocks of the same color. It wasn't the original detail that was in the painting, and it just covered up a big patch of it, and it was permanently saved like that, and I didn't have a copy of my artwork besides that. So what's very, very, very important to remember is when you're saving, make sure to save iterations of your work. Go to Save As. You'll see that I have Coffee, Coffee 2, I could call this Coffee Monkey 3, and then I paint on it, and then I want to save it again. I'm going to go to Save As, and I'll make it Coffee Monkey 4, and then paint on it some more, and then go to Save As, and I'll call it Coffee Monkey 5, and so on. And that way you can go back to an older version. If something happens to one of those versions and it gets corrupted, you make a mistake, whatever, you can always go back to an intermediate step where you have some of the work saved. Maybe you have to redo a little bit, but you don't have to start over from the very, very beginning. If you're working with layer masks, sometimes the layer mask can corrupt the image too. If the mask itself gets corrupted, that's going to affect the image. And sometimes you'll see something like this where you get this like horizontal banding where there's these weird little stripes that are cut through your image. That happens because the mask itself got corrupted. So when you're dealing with layer masks, if you don't know what layer masks are, those are ways to temporarily erase sections of your artwork. And then you can, of course, bring back areas as well using the opposite color. But if that mask gets messed up, then your layer itself gets messed up. So what I would do is when you're working with masks, always right-click on that mask when you're done with it and choose Apply Layer Mask. Once you've applied it, then go ahead and save your artwork. Or if you're really, really worried about masks, and I know that in Corel Painter I have crashes occasionally with masks, what you can do is before you apply a mask to an image, save a copy of your artwork first and then create the layer mask on that layer. It might also be good to save before doing any processor-intensive tasks or effects or filters or anything like that. And another thing that might save you is if your application has an autosave feature, go ahead and use that. I know Photoshop does. And in Corel Painter, there's a backup feature as well under Preferences. You want to check Create Backup on Save. And what that'll do is when you save, it's going to create a backup file as well. That way, if the original save gets corrupted, you'll still have that backup file. In Corel Painter, you can also get to the Corel Painter recovered files, and most of the time, if Corel Painter crashes while you're saving your artwork, you can go to this folder here and you can get a recovered version of your artwork. And most of the time, I'd say 95% of the time, 99% of the time, it's going to have all the layers and it's going to look exactly the same. And that's saved me a lot of times when Corel Painter's crashed while I'm saving. And last but not least, the fifth and final way to ruin your artwork is to change the color mode of the image. So I have an image open here. I'm going to go to Image Mode, and right now it's set to RGB color, and RGB is the best color mode to use while working on a screen or on a computer. CMYK works really well when it comes to printing because RGB and CMYK are two different color spaces. So there are times when you may want to convert to CMYK. For me personally, I just leave everything set to RGB. Let's go ahead and select CMYK color space and see what happens. It's going to give us a warning. It's going to say this may not be what you intend. I'll click OK. And you really have to look at a specific part of this image here to see what's happening, mainly in the dress here. If I do a before and after, you can see that these greens in the dress are nice and vibrant when I'm in RGB color space. But if I reapply that CMYK, it starts to get dull. All those greens get dulled down. If I do before, after, you can see that the colors are changing quite a bit. So you're losing some color information there by making it more compatible with the CMYK color space. It may print more accurately, or it may not. You'd have to see. So that's kind of a gamble. That's why I just leave everything set to RGB. Let's try some of the other modes. Let's go to Image Mode, and let's choose Grayscale. Now what this is going to do is this is going to discard all of your color information. So for example, if I go back to Image Mode RGB, I'm not getting my color back because when I changed it to grayscale, I threw away that color and kept just the light and dark values. So those are gone. So if I were to save this and this were my original, I'd be losing that information permanently. I can of course undo to before I applied those color modes and everything's fine. But besides changing the color modes, you can also change your color profiles. I'm going to go to Edit, Assign Profile. And right now this is set to Adobe RGB, so it has a nice wide range of colors. I recommend always using Adobe RGB for your color profile. But if I were to convert this to sRGB, you can see instantly when I toggle back and forth, sRGB is a much smaller color gamut. It has much fewer colors, so when I convert it to that profile, I'm losing some of my greens. It's becoming much less vibrant. And you can unintentionally convert to sRGB by doing things like saving your artwork as a JPEG. For example, if I go to Save As, and I select JPEG, if I don't check this button that says ICC Profile Adobe RGB 1998, it's not going to keep the original profile. It's going to use the sRGB profile. And then when I reopen this image, it's going to look much less vibrant. So the lesson here is if you do have to save as a JPEG, make sure you save a copy of your work by doing Save As, and make sure to keep your color profile. If you're uploading to a particular website that wants you to use sRGB for whatever reason, then you'll have a copy with and without that change. So those are 5 ways you can ruin your digital artwork. If you found this information helpful, take a quick second to like this video, and if you're new to my channel, I'd love to have you subscribe. I have a lot more digital art videos like this. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.